Tonight, I think that rather than offering a traditional introduction, I'm going to briefly read from the review by Yale historian Beverly Gage that ran in the Washington Post about Mr. Stewart's latest bestseller, Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law. The book is a first draft of history that reminds us just how bizarre these times really are. A New York Times columnist and Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter, Stewart has assembled a gripping blow-by-blow account of President Trump's years-long showdown with the FBI. From the first inklings of something about an email server, through the release of special counsel Mueller's report on Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Encountering it all between the pages of a single book is a new experience. Less the stop-start jerkiness of a tweet storm than the slow-build dread of a dramatic tragedy. The events encountered in Deep State help explain how we ended up at our latest impasse and how Trump is likely to react as it unfolds. What makes the book more than a recitation of unseemly facts is its well-rendered human drama. And I'd like to add one brief note that unlike the books by James Comey and Andrew McCabe, Stewart was unencumbered by DOJ restrictions on what he could report. And as a result, he has new and unparalleled access to many inside the FBI and justice who have yet to speak publicly, some of whom are are either the subject of ongoing investigation or fear they will be. It's a pleasure to have him back. Please welcome James Stewart.
Thank you. It's always great to be here in Philadelphia, this wonderful speaker series, and to be talking in a state where your vote actually matters. Never having lived in a state like that, I don't know what that feels like, but congratulations. After I wrote my book, Bloodsport, I said, I'm never writing another political book again, but never say never, because here I am back with this book, Deep State. Some of the characters in here are people I've now known for decades, including Rudy Giuliani, who was a major character in my second book, The Prosecutors, who showed up again in Den of Thieves, and here he is back in Deep State, and now he may be in the sequel to Deep State. Hillary Clinton, of course, a big character in my book, Bloodsport, and less known, I've known Donald Trump for many years as well. He had a brief career as a corporate raider. It's not on his resume anymore because it was not very successful. But I was covering mergers and acquisitions for the Wall Street Journal, and so just as a routine matter, I called him up one day and said, do you want to talk? And he said, well, yeah, I'd like to talk to you completely on background. Nobody can know that we're me. This has to be top secret. But I said, okay. So I went to Trump Tower and went up to his floor and sat down with him. And about 10 minutes into the interview, his secretary came in and said, oh, Mrs. So-and-so is here to see you. And he said, show her in, bring her in. And I thought, well, so much for the top secret interview. But in she came, and he turned to me and he said, James, this is, I don't remember her exact name, this is Mrs. So-and-so. She was from the Philippines. And he said, she is the richest woman in the world. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I thought Queen Elizabeth was the richest woman in the world. But okay, I'll accept that. And then he turned to me and her, and he said, and Mrs. So-and-so, this is James Stewart. He's the most famous reporter in America. So, of course, I knew she was not the richest woman in the world. Well, that was, a taste of the then seemingly harmless exaggeration to which our president is prone to. He, of course, appears in very different guise in this particular book. This book began about 2.5 years ago. I had known Jim Comey for some time. He shows up in my last book, Tangled Web, about lying, because he was the prosecutor who ran the Martha Stewart case and investigation and ended up charging her with making false statements. And I'd gotten to know him somewhat then. And of course, I was watching his career at the FBI. And like many people, I was somewhat startled and curious and puzzled about first his announcement that he was exonerating Hillary Clinton in the email investigation. Then he was reopening it 12 days before the election. And then 6 days after that, he closed it again. But it had wreaked havoc on the Clinton campaign. All of it quite a departure from standard FBI Justice Department policy. So I I had been, curious about that. I thought maybe that'd be a good, maybe in-depth New Yorker story or other kind of work. I didn't think of it necessarily as a book. But as Trump was elected and the relationship between him and the FBI clearly was becoming more and more tense, I began to think, well, maybe there is a book in all of this. But I was trying to reach out to Comey to see if I could get him to participate in this. And the FBI was, locked down very tight. I mean, everybody there was very paranoid because they were worried. Were their phones being tapped? Where was Trump investigating them? So it was really hard to get through to anyone there. Even the press officer was very guarded. But out of the blue, kind of in April of 2017, I got an invitation to give a talk to FBI agents. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because that gave me the sort of cloak and under which I could go into the FBI building without attracting undue attention. And I was planning then to meet Comey and talk to him and try to encourage him to maybe participate in a book project. Well, the date of my talk was May 12th. And I don't need to tell you, it was on May 9th that Comey was fired. So on May 10th, as shocked as everyone else was by this, I called down to the press people at the FBI and I said, well, do you still want me to come give a talk on Friday? And they said, oh, yes, come. So I did. I gave the talk. I knew right then and there that the idea, as you may remember, Trump immediately after firing Comey said, oh, the FBI was dying for me to get rid of him. Nobody liked him there. They're celebrating, they're rejoicing that I removed him as the FBI director. Well, I knew instantly that was not true. People were extremely demoralized. I don't think they paid much attention to what I had to say, but I did have lunch with some of them afterwards, and I think the fairest way to say it is that they were in shock by the events of what had happened. But once this had happened, I was convinced that there was a book to be done here, both because these are important events in the nation's history, political history and current events, but also because of the element of it being a good story. I mean, every good story has conflict at its core. And here was a very dramatic conflict between the President of the United States and, incredibly, the head of the nation's premier law enforcement agency, the FBI. I say incredibly because historically, presidents and the FBI have worked very closely together. They're all part of the executive branch. And Republican presidents in particular have been champions of law and order and have traditionally relied on the FBI to maintain that sort of reputation. But here we had a president now in open warfare with a head of an FBI who was a Republican who he had just fired. But really good stories do not just have one conflict of two people at them. They have broader conflicts. And to me, here we had not just two individuals clashing, but two radically different views of the American political system. And at stake, really, I thought, was the rule of law itself, which imposes restraints on all of us to varying degrees, but in particular, it imposes restraints on the executive branch. It contains checks on the powers of the presidency, as well as on the investigative agencies. And it seemed to me that we had a president who had embarked on a campaign to eliminate that check on his own power, which posed a very unprecedented challenge to this whole idea of the rule of law. Now, I didn't know how the story was going to come out, and I like that about stories, too. I think inherently there is suspense when you don't know the outcome. But as I set to work on the book, and as events unfolded, as Mueller got appointed as a special counsel fairly soon after Comey was fired, I kind of thought, well, that's going to resolve this suspense. Either Mueller will get over the finish line and he will deliver a thorough, fair, impartial investigative report that we in America all take confidence in, or he won't. And if he does, then that's a victory for the rule of law, and if he doesn't, then it is a loss. Either way, we'll have a resolution. What I was not prepared for was the outcome which we actually did get, which, yes, there was a report, but it didn't reach any conclusions. And it was quickly spun and put into the political maw as a complete exoneration of the president, leaving many people wondering, well, did the rule of law survive or not? I'm going to come back to this in a moment. And then in the most extraordinary turn of events, which I'll also come back to in a few minutes, within 24 hours of Mueller testifying to Congress, President Trump gets on the phone to the president of the Ukraine and hands his opponents the one missing piece from the Russia investigation, which was his own overt participation in an attempt to get a foreign government to interfere in American electoral politics. I mean, on the face of it, that is staggering, but I think, as I will help to explain, it's eminently predictable from all the events that are uncovered in Deep State. And if it didn't happen in the Ukraine, it was going to happen in something else. But let me step back a little bit. I'm not going to repeat things that are in the book. I hope you will read it, but it does cover chronologically the events that began with the initiation of the Hillary Clinton email investigation and continued through the delivery of the Mueller report and its immediate aftermath. And there were any number of significant turns of events there. The various Comey announcements about how the Hillary email was conducted. And I think something that many people don't realize, when you look at this in chronological order, the Russia investigation was going on at the same time the Hillary email investigation was. We, as members of the public, didn't realize this because the email investigation was public. The Russia investigation was still highly confidential. So we only found out about its existence much later. But the FBI was in the unprecedented situation of simultaneously investigating both candidates for the presidency at the same time. Now, I don't quite know what it says about our political system that both major candidates would be the subject of criminal investigations even before the election took place, but I'll leave that for later historians to address. For people in law enforcement, they hate to be investigating any political figure, really. It puts them in a very uncomfortable position. They're part of the government. There are inherent political tensions that are going to rise in that. And here they were investigating both major candidates. That continued until the election, the very surprising result that Trump was elected. We then see unfolding in here his courtship to some extent of Comey, his demands for loyalty, his threats to shut down the Flynn investigation, finally his firing of Comey, the opening of an investigation in which Trump himself was the named subject of the investigation, and then, as you know, the Mueller report and its conclusion. I think by putting things in chronological order, it helps tremendously to understand many of these events, why they unfolded the way they did. I often tell my journalism students that the way the media conveys information is in the order in which they find it out. It is not the order in which it actually took place in real time. I sort of compare it to an artist like Jackson Pollock who takes his paint and he throws it on the canvas. And then we're left to try to make some kind of order out of that. I think for many people, trying to digest the news as we learn of it is a lot like trying to understand one of those paintings where somebody has just thrown everything on the canvas. It's very, very complicated. It becomes very confusing. People throw up their hands and say, oh, it's all too complicated for me. But when you simply put it in chronological order, a lot of mysteries are resolved. And that's certainly one of the things that I've attempted to do here. And in doing that, I've tried to address some of the very large and I think still important questions that are outstanding surrounding these historic events, many of which remain under investigation even as I speak. So I'll start with, I think, a question that I still hear from many people, and that is, did Comey really cause Hillary Clinton to lose the election? And I think there is a very widespread belief, certainly on the part of Hillary Clinton herself, that the answer to that question is yes, he certainly did. I mean, she's gone so far to say that if the election were held the day before he made that announcement, she would have been the president. And Nate Silver, who runs a very sophisticated political data analysis operation, reached a similar conclusion by examining the relatively small number of votes in states including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, where a very modest shift in the popular vote would have led to a different electoral outcome. And I know that it haunts Comey even now that, that his decision to reveal that he was reopening the investigation did, in fact, tilt the election. But when you see it from his perspective, and you may read this and disagree with his action, I think that's, it's quite possible, but at least you would understand why he did what he did. And I think some things that people do not understand about that decision, he made it as though he had an obligation to inform Congress because he had already essentially exonerated it and said that the investigation was closed. So he then had to correct that record. That is true to some extent, but I don't think that's the real reason that he felt he had to disclose that information. One of the reasons, which I reveal, I think, in this book for the first time, is that there was a cadre of FBI agents in the New York office who were militantly opposed to Hillary Clinton and made extreme comments inside the Bureau and to other people, including, yes, Rudy Giuliani, to the effect that they were going to block her from getting elected. Now, you probably know that there's been tremendous publicity given to the text messages between the so-called lovebirds in the FBI, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Peter Strzok was an agent who was in charge of both the Hillary Clinton investigations and the Russia investigation, and Lisa Page was a lawyer very close to Andrew McCabe, who was the acting FBI director after Comey was fired. Now, as I'm sure they regret more than anyone, they did have an affair, and because they were having an affair, they did most of their communications through text messages on their work phones because they thought that would be safe. I don't need to tell you that when people are in love, they do things they later come to regret, but they did it. They thought they would never be revealed, and of course, as you see, the somewhat bizarre turn of events, it all became public. And those texts, which did contain overtly hostile messages towards Trump, became public. And Trump has jumped on those to tar the entire FBI as being biased against him. But I think a few things to keep in mind here. They had something like 40,000 texts. And out of all those texts, these that had political sentiments amounted to maybe 20 or 30 texts. It's really a surprisingly small slice of that. Secondly, people in the FBI are entitled to hold whatever political views they want. There is no requirement that you be neutral or you don't have political views. Everyone has political views, and they have a First Amendment right to have political views, but they're not allowed to have them influence their work. And I can address that part of the question. But I think the other important thing is no one examined the texts of anyone else in the FBI to see what they were saying about the election. And I can almost guarantee that if they did, the makeup of the FBI was overwhelmingly pro-Trump and anti-Hillary Clinton, taken as a whole. And there was this cadre in New York. Some of them were talking to Rudy Giuliani, and they had a history of leaking damaging information to Hillary Clinton to the press, specifically the existence of an investigation into the Clinton Foundation, whether it was taking money in return for Hillary taking steps as Secretary of State. So when Comey was considering whether to announce publicly that he was reopening an investigation, he knew that everyone in New York knew about the discovery of these additional emails. They were found on the laptop of Anthony Weiner, the disgraced congressman, who was using his laptop. Sometimes people ask me why I don't write fiction. This is the answer. If I made this up, none of you would believe it. But you'll recall that Anthony Weiner was sending lewd photographs to underage girls on his laptop. And sitting on the same laptop were 60,000 emails that Hillary Clinton had sent his wife, Huma Abedin, who was her top aide. So the FBI in New York, as part of the Weiner investigation, seized the laptop. And then they discovered all of these missing emails on there, potentially missing emails. So they had to get another search warrant. That's what led to the reopening of the investigation. But everybody in New York, as a result, knew about the Clinton emails being on there. So the likelihood that Comey and the FBI could say nothing while they investigated this The idea that that would not leak out was almost non-existent. I mean, you can imagine the potency of that information. And if it had leaked and then trumpeted by the partisan pro-Trump media, and I know you know who they are, it would have been so much more damaging to the FBI than if the information came from the director himself and was communicated to Congress. So I think that's the backstory that really helps to explain why he did it. You may still feel that that was a mistake, but his choice was not between keeping it secret and announcing it. The choice was between announcing it or have it leak. Of course, we can't rerun history. Maybe it wouldn't have leaked, but the odds seem highly likely that it would. And then I have to say about the Hillary announcement, I remember being at a board meeting in Indiana when that news came out, and I was probably in a room of well-educated, moderate, voters, 60% of whom are Republicans, who were probably having trouble with the idea of voting for Donald Trump. It was like a cold wind swept through there, and I realized, oh, they're all going out and voting for Trump now. But the reason was Hillary Clinton had sown decades of distrust in that segment of the electorate, the cattle futures trading, the Whitewater affair, the Monica Lewinsky cover-up, the accusing of the various women. Hillary Clinton had a record that made it seem all too plausible that she had done something shady in the emails, which in a way is too bad because I think you'll see in here there wasn't really much to that email case. And I think that was absolutely the right decision not to prosecute her for that. Well, let me turn to another question, which very much is in the news now. Was the Russia investigation a plot by intelligence agencies to discredit Trump, to set him up for this entire investigation and the appointment of a special counsel? I've been pummeled with questions from pro-Trump supporters along these lines. And as you may know, the current Attorney General is now globetrotting, gathering evidence himself that goes to the question of how this case began. And he has appointed a former U.S. attorney from Connecticut to lead yet another investigation into the origin of the Russia investigation. I wish they would just read my book because I could save them a lot of taxpayer money and a lot of their own time. There is no real mystery to how the Russia investigation began. A very young, naive, unqualified foreign policy advisor to Trump's campaign, George Papadopoulos, had learned through a somewhat mysterious source that the Russians supposedly had incriminating evidence on Hillary Clinton. He was in London. He met with an Australian diplomat and an associate of his, and he blabbed about this, and they were interested enough that they sent a cable to the intelligence agencies in Australia. They did nothing with it. It just was another bit of information that was interesting but didn't seem particularly significant. Some weeks later, of course, WikiLeaks revealed that they did have the hacked emails from the Democratic National Committee. It was only then that Australia woke up and said, wow, that information from our diplomat in London turned out to be correct. The Russians, and it was known that the Russians were behind the hack, the Russians did have incriminating information on Hillary Clinton, which suggests that his information was accurate. They passed that information to American intelligence agencies, which have a long and close history of cooperating with Australia. They, in turn, gave it to the FBI. They flew to London. They interviewed the diplomat. That was the beginning of what is now known as, by its code name, Operation Crossfire Hurricane. That was the beginning of the Russia probe. It's that simple. It was not the notorious Steele dossier that alleged that Clinton was meeting with prostitutes in Moscow. It was not the undercover. It was not the mysterious source who talked to Papadopoulos. It was an Australian diplomat who set these in motion. Now, there are conspiracy theorists who say, well, the Australian diplomat was part of the conspiracy, so the people in Australia. I mean, the conspiracy is so vast in order to make those pieces all fit together. I sometimes would like to ask these people, have you ever tried to put together a conspiracy? It's not that easy. But even if this Mifsud, who was the original Papadopoulos source, I strongly suspect, as do many in intelligence, he is a Russian agent of some sort. Some people believe he's a CIA agent. In a way, it doesn't matter who he is. The fact is that his operative intelligence was accurate. It was correct that the Russians had hacked this information and had transmitted that knowledge to a member of the Trump campaign team. And that is what started the investigation. I will be amazed if any of these very high-profile, expensive investigations turn up any information to the contrary. Now I want to turn to this central concept. I call the book Deep State. Honestly, when I started the book after Comey was fired, I don't think I'd ever heard the phrase deep state. It has now become one of these catchy slogans that Trump is very good at coining. I fully expect to hear people start chanting it at one of these rallies any day. Just the other day, he was again alleging this existence of a deep state. In the Trump parlance, he has essentially weaponized this concept and brought it into a distinctly Trumpian definition, which is very far from its origins. The concept really began and was first applied to the entrenched bureaucracies, military-industrial complexes in foreign countries like Turkey, Egypt, that have a history, sometimes a democratic government, sometimes authoritarian. But when these entrenched bureaucracies felt their power and privileges were threatened, they would in many cases act to overturn the government, elected, dictatorial, whatever it was. They would act to protect their own interests at the expense of the official government. That kind of leapfrogged into America with theories that talked about the deep state here as referring essentially to private interests, mostly powerful Wall Street banks, Silicon Valley, giant tech companies, their lobbyists in Washington, who would also act to protect their own interests at the expense of the democratic will when they felt threatened. And then Trump has taken it to an all new level entirely. In his view, he first began to use it referring to the FBI and Comey as the leaders of this so-called deep state. He's expanded it to parts of the Justice Department. Now, in the most recent example, it looks like the entire State Department is also part of the deep state. The deep state is again, he's clever. It has these sinister kind of Middle Eastern, maybe even Islamic origins. It's dark, it's conspiratorial, and its goal is to preserve its own power and privileges and to overthrow the democratically elected president, in this case, Trump himself. So it's a very convenient organizing principle which shifts the focus of examination from what he has been doing to the people who have been bringing information to light that he finds uncomfortable. Now, I have to say, when I read a book, I often skip the epigraph. But I want to read you the one that I found for this book. Because Trump has gone so far as to brand these members of the deep state, who include all these people in the FBI, Andrew McCabe, who was fired, Comey, who was fired. He has called them traitors. He has implied that they deserve the death penalty. They're all either have been or are under criminal investigation for, you should read the book and make up your own mind, but for essentially doing what their jobs required them to do. Trump seems to feel that anyone who disagrees with him or opposes him in any way is part of a deep state which makes them traitors to this country. But here's my epigraph. Patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. That was said by Mark Twain. But it was tweeted by Donald Trump on January 29th, 2014, when Obama was president. So they were patriotic when they stood up to Obama, but they're traitors when they stand up to him. Finally, I want to just say a few words about the current investigation and the impeachment proceedings. There's so much in this book I can't really have time to get into, but I've been asked by some people like, oh, don't you wish you'd waited? You know, if you could be putting this in, you'd have another chapter. Well, if I really waited to then, this book wouldn't be out for another 6 or 9 months. But the answer is no, I don't wish I had waited, because when you read this book and you read the final pages, to me it is crystal clear that something like this was going to happen. And the reason for that, I believe, is Trump is say what else you want about him, he is a very distinctive personality. He views the world in purely binary terms: win, lose. That's it. It's nothing more complicated than that. He came out of the Mueller investigation, he stepped forward and immediately said, it's total exoneration. No collusion, no obstruction. I won, and that means I did absolutely nothing wrong in this entire thing. So what does he do? He's emboldened. The next day, he goes up there and he doubles down on everything he did with Russia and takes it up with Ukraine, unleashes Giuliani on his undercover diplomacy, and now finds himself in the same predicament. And the behavior that he exhibits, you see over and over and over again in deep state. First of all, he's extremely impulsive. He brags about the fact that he makes decisions based on his quote-unquote gut feelings, some of which he makes in a flash. Secondly, he doesn't listen to anyone around him. One of my chapters in here is called, I know you told me not to do this, but he does it anyway. Then, if people don't agree with him or criticize or try to stand up to him, he gets rid of them. Remarkably, people around him, as the events of deep state are unfolding, do to a large degree protect him from his worst impulses. And I'm talking here about people like Don McGahn, the White House counsel, the much reviled and humiliated Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General. Say what you will about Steve Bannon, but Steve Bannon had sense enough not to carry out some of Trump's orders. And even Corey Lewandowski knew to ignore Trump or just let it slide when he would ask him to do something illegal. Well, they're all gone. Trump was always saying, I wish I had the Attorney General that, Jack Kennedy had. Or why don't I have a Roy Cohn? I mean, some of you may not even know who Roy Cohn is, but the idea that the President of the United States would be hailing Roy Cohn as the model lawyer, I mean, among other things, he was disbarred. And of course, he was a notorious figure in the McCarthy hearings. But I'm not saying he's gotten his Roy Cohn, but he now has a cast of characters who do not stand up to him. And in the Attorney General now, William Barr, he has someone who, he had barely read the Mueller report when he ran out to say, not only no collusion with Russia, but there can't be any obstruction because there was no underlying crime. A gross misreporting of what was in the Mueller report, so much so that Mueller wrote a letter criticizing his statements that did not deter him. The result of this, which goes to my ultimate question about the rule of law, is we now have the whistleblower coming forward. The whistleblower made what everyone agreed were credible complaints. He sent them through the channels, and the whistleblower complaint went to the Attorney General, William Barr. Now, what he should have done, the way our system works, is he would take the complaint, he would give it to the director of the FBI, say, investigate this, find the facts, bring them back to me. I will then make a decision about whether we have a legal issue or not. But no, Barr did not give it to the FBI. He said, oh, there's no crime here, before he even knew what the facts were. Now, the irony of this to me is, which something that Barr doesn't seem to understand, which Trump certainly does not understand, is that the rule of law exists in part to protect the president. Had they done the proper thing, which was give it to the FBI, number one, we probably wouldn't even know what was going on. It would be done very discreetly, very quietly. Secondly, the facts would come out. They would have an opportunity to then make a decision about them. Instead, we have now an impeachment proceeding. But the fact is, there's no alternative. If the investigative agency, the executive branch, are not going to do their job and investigate credible complaints of wrongdoing in the executive branch, someone has to do it. We have no one else but Congress, and it should be no surprise that it is then going to be a highly politicized process, and one under the scrutiny of the media, in the spotlight, day in and day out, which is what we have now. Now, I have criticisms of the Mueller report. His job was to decide if there was a crime or not. If his reason for that was that there's a Justice Department policy that says you can't indict a sitting president, so it would have been unfair to say that there was a crime. But that was not his mandate. If he felt he could not fairly accuse him of a crime while he was sitting as president, he shouldn't take on the job. What if, for example, he had found serious collusion with Russia? What if, in the extreme case, he found that Donald Trump was essentially an agent of the Russian government, which, I mean, far-fetched as it seems, was in the realm of possibility when no one knew the truth? Well, what if he had found that, as well as the obstruction? Was he then going to say to the American people, I can't tell you what the conclusions are because it wouldn't be fair to a sitting president? I don't think so. So while I have a lot of respect for Mueller and how he operates, I do feel when push came to shove, he did not want to take on the responsibility of drawing the obvious conclusions, which you can see if you read this book, the obvious conclusions about whether Trump did obstruct justice. So we don't have a verdict yet on the central tension here, whether the rule of law is going to triumph in the end or not. We may not know for some time. But the fact of the matter is, it still has a fighting chance. I guess I'm an optimist by nature. The rule of law is the foundation of democratic constitutional government. It protects all of us. It curbs all of us as well. We can't do anything we want, but we all accept it as the fairest system that anyone has ever devised for allocating power. It protects the weak. It protects the strong. It provides a fair playing field for all of our citizens. It's something deeply ingrained in our democratic traditions, and I can't believe that we will let even a very colorful president who's defying every other norm get away with destroying that underpinning of our republic. Thank you.
Unfortunately, the we includes a large number of Republican senators and congresspeople. Is there anything that Trump could do, in your opinion, that would have them turn against him?
Well, some of them know. Some of them are clearly going to walk the plank with him no matter what. And but that's not what matters. I do feel there are people, there are Republican congressmen and senators in much more purple states, much more closely divided states, I think, who need to be much more careful listening to their constituents and are going to have to take seriously these allegations. I think we've already seen a shift where McConnell was hoping to just shut this thing down without really any serious proceedings. He's now already talking about at least the pretense of a thorough examination of a lot of this. And I don't know where this is going. I mean, there's new information coming up every single day. You know, the fortress White House is crumbling. You know, we've got a parade of intelligence officers, State Department people, military people willing to now go speak about this Ukraine situation. I mean, I'm not making any predictions, but I think it's looking more serious all the time. So I think there are fair-minded people, even in, you know, among people who have supported Trump, who are going to have to take all of this seriously.
What has happened to Rudy Giuliani?
I was recently interviewed for a Times episode called The Weekly about Giuliani, and I made the point that I mean, there's a saying that as we get older, we just become more of what we always were, and I honestly think that applies to Giuliani. I was looking back at my first book that I wrote about him, and he was criticized as U.S. attorney that he was always taking credit. Anything good that happened in that office was his accomplishment. Anything bad was somebody else's fault. And the young attorneys who would put in, you know, years of work on some of these cases and then would be sidelined were grumbling that they never got any credit. So he made the argument that he said, you know, in your future careers, no one's going to remember any case you worked on or whether you won or lost. What they will remember is who you worked for. So the more credit I get, the better for your resume. Now, they were not mollified by that, but it was, and he made the same argument to me, and I quoted him in the book. It was like, it's not me, I'm just taking all this credit for their benefit. That was Giuliani to a T. He loves the spotlight. He was desperate to stay relevant, desperate to be in the news. He wanted a cabinet position. Trump mocked him, dismissed him, didn't give him a job. But he came in Trump's view, he really saved him in the Mueller case. That's laid out in my book. And so he's been high. The presidents have been very high on him again. But mark my words, this will end badly because there is not enough air in the room for both Giuliani and Trump. And the very fact that we're talking about Giuliani at this minute and not Trump is the kind of thing that drives Trump crazy. You'll see it in the book, but there are several occasions where he bumps into Comey and he says something like, "Oh my God, Comey, you're more famous than I am." Coming from Trump, that is never a compliment. His days were numbered, and I suspect Giuliani will be thrown overboard relatively soon. But no, Giuliani is just behaving as Giuliani on steroids.
The Democrats have a habit of overplaying their hand sometimes. We saw it when they had Mueller in Congress and everybody in their 5 minutes kind of ranted instead of behave like real people. Is that a risk we've got with the impeachment proceedings, that they become a political circus and not a real criminal investigation?
Yes, I think it is a risk. And I hope, I went to law school and practiced as a lawyer for a while too, and there's an old saying that when the facts are on your side, stick to the facts. And that would be my advice to the Democrats here. I don't think it needs a lot of spinning, or it may need some explanation, some context, but the facts are what they are, and I think that's what American people want to know. They want to know the facts, and they want to be in a position to make up their own minds. I do feel also, though, that a lot of the material from the Mueller investigation should be included in any impeachment thing to demonstrate a pattern of behavior. Again, I said what has happened in the Ukraine is exactly what happened in many other situations, both here and then again with the Syria thing. It's exactly the same thing. The impulsiveness. Oh, and I forgot to mention one of the key factors. There's the impulsive decision, there's ignoring the advice, there's the firing people around you, and then when the reaction is bad, you lie about it. And that's the same pattern. We've seen it over and over again. So I think some of the material from Mueller should be included in any kind of articles of impeachment to show a consistent pattern of behavior. We're not talking about one random phone call here. This is a consistent pattern of ignoring the rule of law. When it comes to the rule of law in Trump, I've come to the view that it's not that he's hostile to the rule of law. I don't think he has any concept of what it is. I don't think he understands it remotely. And so he just instinctively defies it because he doesn't recognize its existence. There's a passage where a very interesting character in the book, Rod Rosenstein, is leaving, and he inexplicably praises Trump's devotion to the rule of law as he's leaving. And he quotes Trump, purporting to say how much he believes in the rule of law. So I went back and I found that actual quote. And Rosenstein had left off the first part of the quote. Trump was giving a prepared speech for Law Day, and he says, the exact quote was something that Law Day recognizes the importance of the rule of law. He didn't say, I recognize the importance of the rule of law. And try as I might, I never found a single occasion where Trump himself actually endorsed the rule of law or seemed to show any understanding of what it actually is. So I think, going back to your original question, stick to the facts here. When the facts are good, you don't need to hype them, put layers of political spin, or making them overly partisan. I honestly, first of all, I'm not a partisan person. I am an independent reporter. I try to come up with the facts. But when the facts, again, when the facts are what you see here, all you have to do is state the facts, and they make the case. You don't need to put a lot of spin on it, and I hope the Democrats will trust in that. Because, again, I feel removing a president is a very serious issue. I don't care how you feel about him. And it should not be a partisan exercise. I think all parties we should be able to agree on the basic constitutional foundations of this country and when those lines have been crossed.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but this is what really worries me, is that I think the sense of the people in this room and what you say is that we all have great confidence in facts and in rationality. And we're all on the side of that, and we all agree with that, and we respond to those kind of arguments. What we seem to be up against in this particular instance is a very unified, if not monolithic, 30 or 40% who are impervious to rationality, impervious to facts, and in fact have accepted the blur of lines between what is fact and not as fact that I'm not sure some people can really tell. So what really concerns me here is how do you move that 30%, or do you not bother? Or if we all believe that the rule of law applies, what happens if something goes to the Supreme Court and they vote along partisan lines? Then we're screwed, right?
Well, to go to your question about the 30%, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a certain percentage of the population who are impervious to fact. As I've gotten older, I've just come to accept that. And by the way, it's not just Trump supporters. They are on the left as well. They are highly ideological, and they are quasi-religious in their views. I mean, I have had Trump supporters tell me things like God has spoken to them and said that Trump is the prophet who is going to deliver them out of the wilderness. You can't respond to that. And we're not going to reach those. But that, fortunately, those percentages, whatever they actually are, they're not a majority. They're not enough to actually determine the outcome of this or determine the outcome of the next election. I firmly believe there is still a majority of fair-minded, independent-thinking people who want to make up their own minds, who do care about the truth, who do care about facts, and do care about reason and the ability, the scientific method, to test a hypothesis against the facts and to draw conclusions that stand the test of scrutiny. I think there are enough people out there to protect us all.
This kind of picks up from that question. During the Watergate time, most people got their information from similar sources. Right now, you mentioned Barr is going all around the world. Your story will be told on CNN and MSNBC. It won't be told on Fox News. Barr's story will be told on Fox News. When I talk to a Fox News watcher, they don't even know some of the things that are out there, so they're making their decisions based on incomplete facts. How do you get around that?
Well, I will tell you, I'm kind of proud of the fact that I have been on Fox News talking about my book. People said, oh, you're not going to go on there, are you? I said, I absolutely am going to go on Fox News. I believe in a dialogue, even with people that don't necessarily agree with your conclusions. And I have to say it was a very respectful session. Although since that happened, you may have read Trump has been cracking down on Fox News, saying, oh, you're veering off the reservation here. I don't think he was talking about me particularly, but they weren't being loyal enough. So I don't know if I'd be invited back today. Yes, I mean, we live in a much more partisan world. In Watergate, it's true. We had this sort of neutral networks and news magazines that kind of conveyed the information, and people, I think, went along with that. And now we live, for better or worse, we have a much more democratic media. Everybody has a platform. They can go on Facebook and say whatever they want. They can watch Fox News day in and day out. They choose the source of their information, but they're in that crowd of people who are not genuinely open to the facts. And it's a free country; they can listen to whatever they want to. But I think we just can't worry about those people. And by the way, I'm not using the word deplorable. That was a horrible word that I think really hurt Clinton. I respect my fellow citizens and the choices they want to make, but I don't agree with that, and I've dedicated my life simply to bringing facts to people so they can make up their own minds.
In your mind, is he the most dangerous person we've had in the White House? Because I have this argument with my wife constantly. Our democracy has survived bad presidents. I say we've survived worse presidents. She says who, but is he the most dangerous person to our democracy you've seen in the White House?
That's a good question, and the fact that you use dangerous is an interesting choice of words. Let me say this: in his defense, I will say we have not undergone a horrible catastrophe. We haven't dropped a nuclear weapon on Korea, but that's a pretty low bar. So I'll hand him that. We're not in a depression. If by dangerous you mean, look, the qualities I've just listed in the chief executive of the United States, in my view, they are dangerous qualities. This impulsiveness, the gut feelings, the not listening to advice, the lying about things. That is a dangerous combination. And I was talking to some friends of mine here just before we came in, and I think this is unique with any president, but I do have a low-lying, underlying sense of anxiety every day that I could wake up to some shocking, unexpected, horrible thing. And I've never felt that way with another president.
You mentioned how Trump sees the world in a very binary fashion, but I think that two of his more fundamental traits are a very deep and profound insecurity and vindictiveness. And the insecurity shows up in his coddling, or, to use a crude expression, sucking up to Putin, Erdogan, and other strongmen, pseudo-strongmen, Orban, Duterte, and so forth. And I think I would be curious to hear whether you see that as, whether you agree with that, and in a particular instance, how would you explain what he's done recently in selling out the Kurds?
Well, I would largely agree with what you said. He is very, very seemingly insecure. He craves, one of his binary questions is, do you love him or do you not love him? And there's kind of nothing in between. He wants to be loved, which I guess is better than the opposite. He is extremely vindictive. All these characters in Deep State, he's out to get them. He's putting them through criminal investigations. Hillary Clinton is under investigation again. He has a former U.S. attorney from Nevada re-examining the whole email thing. He still has people chanting, lock her up. He's not going to let her alone. He's launched a criminal investigation of Jim Comey. He was cleared, but it'll start again. He has a criminal investigation going now on Mueller, who supposedly exonerated him. So, and he never forgets any of these things. So, and all of these are consistent with a extremely insecure personality. I'm not a psychologist, but I did review a biography of Trump, and in the course of that, I noticed that he actually is used. This was before he ran for president, but he does figure in several prominent textbooks on the sociopathic personality. I just put that out there. I'm not saying he is a sociopath, but he is in the literature. And this was before he was president.
Would you care to speculate, assuming hopefully that a Democrat wins the White House, how long it will take to restore some of the damage that has been done to our system?
That's a very good question, and I've been very troubled to see the speed with which these great institutions have been dismantled with Trump at the helm, and I'm speaking specifically of the Justice Department and the FBI. First of all, very, very good people have been hounded out of there, either fired or pushed out or held up to public ridicule. It's demoralized the people who are still there. And then, of course, what effect do you think that's had on the people who might want to come to work there? You don't go to work for either agency because you want to get rich. You did it because you're a patriot. You want to serve your country. You believe in the rule of law, and you believe that those agencies played very important roles. Those people are not going now. It's going to take a very long time to rebuild from the inside the morale, and from the outside the trust in the American people. He is branding them as traitors to America and part of this deep state over and over and over again every single day. That's doing tremendous damage to the confidence that we as Americans have traditionally had in law enforcement in this country and in the FBI, which is the foundation of feeling that we live in a just society. So the damage is really enormous.
I just want to know what was on your night table. What are you reading these days?
I'm reading two things. I'm reading a nonfiction book called Conspiracy, which is about, not about this, but is about the Gawker situation where Peter Thiel financed Hulk Hogan's lawsuit and put Gawker out of business. And I'm kind of reading it with morbid fascination because I always thought, oh, thank God I'm not ever in Gawker. But I don't want to say I miss it, but it's, I don't know, I'm a little queasy, you know, as a First Amendment champion, I'm a little uneasy that it got put out of business. And what is the name of it? I'm reading it, it's really wonderful. It's a historical novel about James I and Charles II of England. The problem with reading on the Kindle is I never see the cover, you know, so who happen to have been Stewart Kings, no relationship to me, but when I want to get out of all this, and I think things are so bad here, trust me, it was really bad in 17th century England, and they came through it. So good last question. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. Bye. Thank you.